Hello everyone, I'm going to be going over the notes for the watercolor techniques. So some things that you're going to need is you're going to need watercolor paper, you're going to need a palette, a brush, some salt, a paper clip or some other slightly sharp object, and some way to clean your brush and a writing utensil. So the first thing that you are going to do is you're going to draw a line straight down the middle of your paper, because we're dividing this up into different sections. And then you want to divide this up into roughly 5 equal sections from there. They don't have to be perfect, but you do need 5. And the bottom right hand corner, I want you to write your first and last name and grade and period. So you would be 7.2, 8.2, 6.2, depending on where you are and what grade. Okay, so we're gonna get started on our techniques. So one thing you need to remember with watercolors is that you are never going to go directly from your paint to your paper. You're always going to do paint, puddle, paper. So the way we do that is we take our water, we get some paint onto our brush, and we put it into one of these wells. If your watercolor does not have a well for you to use, you are then going to use a plate or something else. You saw I went back into my water to get some more water to make a nice puddle. I'm just going to stick this right here, which is going to go onto our first technique, which is called wet on dry, which means wet on dry is where you use wet paint on dry paper. This is what you generally think of when you are doing watercolor. You don't do anything to the paper. It's very easy to control, but it's kind of boring. So you just go from your puddle to your paper and leave it there. The next technique is called wet on wet. And wet on wet means wet paint on wet paper. So I'm going to take my brush with some clean water and put it down on here like so that there is water. You can't really see it on the camera, but there is water there. And then going to go in, and when I try to paint, the paint is going to spread. The paint is going to spread because it is interacting with the water. You do not have as much control, but it creates an interesting technique and texture. Okay, the next one that we are going to be learning is called dry brush. This is a technique that is pretty simple. What you want to make sure you do is make sure you have enough of your paint, and then you are going to dry your brush, and it is going to cause streaks. It's not going to be nice and neat. This is a way to add texture to your project. Your next one is called flat wash. Okay, a flat wash is where you basically lay down one solid color. This is generally a wet on dry technique, but you can also do this with a wet on wet technique. But what you're gonna do is you're going to make a puddle, and you want to make it watery. A wash in watercolor means that it's a little bit of paint and a lot of water. A wash will generally cover a large surface area, so you want to make sure that you prepare that ahead of time. So we're gonna go ahead and do a flat wash all the way across, and it'll be nice and pretty like so. Okay, the next one that we're going to be doing is called a graded wash. Okay, a graded wash is like an ombre. This one is a wet on wet technique. So what I want you to do is whatever color you choose to do, I want you to make it like it's almost like a normal puddle. It doesn't have as much like a wash like the other one would be. I'm going to wet down my paper like so. And then I'm going to go into my paint. I'm going to go across the top. You're going to see that it starts to spread downward. That's what I want to happen. If it's still not dark enough, I'm going to just get a little bit more. And then I'm going to dilute this a little bit and add a little bit more down here. Sometimes you got to play with this one a little bit. This is one where you then want to pick your paper up and let the paints slide down. You're wanting to create an ombre effect. And when this is done and dry, you will have that. Now, do y'all see this puddle of water that is forming at the bottom of this? This is called a water bead, and we do not want these here once we are done with what we are doing. So what you're gonna do is you're gonna take your brush and you're gonna dry it off really well. And your brush is actually gonna act like a sponge. And if you just put your brush up to that bead, it'll soak it up like so. We don't want that there because it can go flying off and bring paint to where you don't want paint to be. So that is a graded wash. For the next one that we're gonna do, you're going to need one more color. So I'm gonna choose one more color and I'm gonna go into purple. Just because purple's fun. And again, I am going to make another well of color. I'm going to make another nice puddle, like so. This one is called fusing or blending. I use both terms back and forth, so you will probably hear me call this both. This is also a wet on wet technique. It is my favorite thing to do. So the first thing we're gonna do is we're gonna add some water down because it's a wet on wet technique. And then we're going to add our colors in. We're gonna add our colors into where we have paint. We're gonna add some blue in here. And we're gonna add some of our purple. Nice, pretty purple. Now, I've noticed a lot with students that they don't generally add enough water to this. So what we're gonna do is when you have a clean brush, just drop in a little bit of water. We're then going to pick this up because watercolor is a medium that you actually want to move it around. And I'm going to tilt this around, which allows the colors with the water to fuse and blend together in cool ways. So you can turn it upside down and let more of the purple go this way and then go over here. And it creates an interesting texture. Now this one, we're also going to have to deal with the beads. So we're gonna have to do the same thing where we dry our brush off really, really well and we start to soak up our bead. You don't want to leave the bead behind. It can cause a lot of problems, so just don't leave the bead behind at all. So we'll get rid of it and boom. When that dries, it'll be really, 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 really pretty. Now we're gonna go into a texture, which is pretty cool. It is called Sgraffito, which is S-G-R-A-F-F-I-T-O. And we are going to be using a paper clip for this. So you're just gonna open up your paper clip a little bit. If you don't have a paper clip, you can use a push pin, you can use a wooden skewer, you can even use a ballpoint pen with the pen part put away. And what we're gonna do is we're actually going to scratch the surface of our paper. Now we don't want to go through our paper, but we do want to scratch it up. This is going to create an interesting texture. You can use any of the techniques that we've been using, but just for simplicity and time, I'm just going to do a straight wet on dry. So as I put my paint down, the paint is actually going to collect in the grooves caused by the scratch marks, and it is going to remain there. This is great for concrete or trees or some other textures. There's a lot of uses for this, so this is a good technique to know, a textural technique to know. And that's pretty cool. So that is that one. So the next one that we are going to be learning is a technique where you actually will use salt to create a texture. This one is a wet on wet technique. You can do it with a bunch of different ways, but you always want to make sure you have enough water with this one. So I'm just going to put down some water, and then I'm going to get some of my paint, and I'm going to fill in this area. You could do fusing, you do a lot of things with it, but the salt is an interesting texture. It can create things that look like sand, like snow, and like stars. What you're going to want to do is you're going to want to pinch some of the salt, and you're going to let it sprinkle on there. This is a wet on wet technique where we don't mess with the bead, and we just put our salt on and we let it sit there. And when it dries, it'll have a very interesting texture. The salt will actually soak up part of the watercolors, and you'll have this kind of speckly, blotchy thing, which is super cool. The last one that we're going to learn about is called splatter. Okay, splatter is simple. We're not going to be Jack and Pollock and flinging our brushes. We're not going to be going like this with our brushes. We're going to be doing a different type of splatter. It's more controlled. Basically, well, before I do that, you can also do splatter with wet on wet or wet on dry. So on your paper, put a little bit of water down, just on half of it so that you can see the difference. And then you're going to load your brush up. Now you can use your finger to do this, you can use a pen or another paintbrush, but you are going to tap your brush, and depending on how hard you tap, depends on how big your splatters are. It is going to get a little bit everywhere, but it is going to get less everywhere than if you were just flinging your brush around. And that is the different techniques that we are learning in watercolor. These are the ones that you need to know, and this is what is on your assignment that is going to be for a grade. This is really simple, really easy. Now I'm going to show you two more techniques that are quite easy, but also interesting. So I'm just going to get a scrap piece of paper. There's also something called resisting watercolor. There's a lot of different things you can use. You can use tape. You can use a special pen like this, which is a masking fluid tape pen, or you can use something like this, which is just a white crayon. So before you paint, you draw what you want to draw. And then when you paint with any of the techniques, the wax will resist where you put your watercolor, and you will continue to have that area. So this is resist. You don't have to do this for your project. It's just another interesting thing. And then the last interesting one is using rubbing alcohol. So I'm going to just put down some paint. I'm going to let you see what the rubbing alcohol does. So I'm going to put down some green. I'm going to put down some blue and some green. My brain was ahead of itself. And then I'm going to be using some rubbing alcohol. I am using 70% isopropyl alcohol that I've put into a little squeeze bottle. Now the squeeze bottle does not work perfectly, but hopefully you'll be able to see. So you see that it spreads and interacts with the paint in an interesting way, and when it dries, it is super cool as well. So this is your lesson on watercolor techniques. This is how you can follow along. If you missed it on the first day, or you just need a refresher course. All right, thank you everybody, bye.